you asked Steve the question, how do we get the product out there? I was on bated breath, Steve, waiting for you to tell me what I need to do to get the news out there. It is difficult. It is difficult. Martin knows this also. How do you let the general user base know what can be achieved? Because a lot of this stuff, yes, if you go crazy, it can cost, how far do you want to go with these types of things? But a lot of this doesn't need to cost crazy money. Good performance is available at very reasonable prices.
Hello and welcome to the AV Forums Home AV podcast for Monday the 15th of July. Welcome along once again, and today I'm joined by Martin G. Hello, Martin.
Hello.
We also have Neil Davidson from SRND Group. Hello, Neil.
Hi, Phil.
And joining us from CEDIA is Steve Carter. Hello, Steve.
Hi, Phil.
So thank you guys for joining us again. These subjects seem to be going down very well with listeners. We're taking everybody through how to put together an AV system, whether that's a dedicated room, whether that's a media room, or even just a living room. What can you do to improve your performance in terms of video and sound and all the rest of it? And we're still sticking to sound this week because we're talking about speaker systems suitable for AV systems. And one of the questions that always pops up is, do you need different speakers compared to hi-fi speakers for home theatre, home cinema, and so on? We're going to get into that in a second because we're going to do the Q&As and everything else towards the end of the podcast. So if you want to stick around for competitions and our Q&A session, that's towards the end of the podcast. And if you want to watch this podcast as a video on YouTube, you can subscribe to the AV Forums podcast channel. That is different from the main channel, so go find that and subscribe to it. You'll never miss an AV Forums podcast. And if you enjoy the content, if you like what we're doing here and the discussion and obviously the knowledge of the people on the podcast, and you'll find out a little bit more about that in a sec, then why not share the podcast to your friends on social, if you're on forums or anything like that, Facebook groups and so on, then why not share this so other people can also get access to the information that we're going to talk about here. So who are we? We're AV Forums. We've been around for a long time, well over 20 years. AV Forums started in the year 2000. The editorial started in 2003. I'm Phil Hinton. I've been the editor here for over 20 years now. That's a long time. I'm certified by the ISF, THX, and PVA. I do the majority of the video reviews, TV reviews, that kind of thing. I do delve into audio products, and you also see my face on the videos and the podcasts. Also here is Martin. Martin, briefly explain who you are to our listeners.
Yes, hello. So the beginning of my journey into the AV world was joining Lucasfilm THX in San Francisco. I worked for them for nearly 10 years on both the home and pro sides. Then I went to LA and worked for the digital cinema division of NEC Corporation, doing business development for them for their 2K DCI compliant projectors. Returned to the UK in 2016. I am presently head of PR for a well-known loudspeaker manufacturer, but at the same time I do a lot of review and feature writing for print media and, of course, AV Forums.
Excellent. Welcome along, Martin. We also have Neil. Neil, explain to everybody who you are and what you do.
So, been in the AV business now for a long time, Phil. We have been involved in home cinemas and all of those types of things for a very long time. A little one for Martin here. On Friday, we announced our new DCI residential content services, Martin. So a very exciting development for those at the very high end of the market. But that's the sort of stuff that we like to do. Your very high end, super cool systems. I'm lucky to be involved in that stuff.
Excellent. And those of you who've been around a while, you'll know lots of the faces on the podcast anyway. But for our new listeners and viewers, we like to just tell you and explain who we are. And of course, we've got Steve Carter now. Some of you been around a while will have known Steve in a previous life, selling projectors and other kit for JVC, but he works for CEDIA nowadays. So tell us a little bit about what you do, Steve.
Yeah, so thank you. But I work for CEDIA, as you just mentioned, and I've been with them just over 10 years now. And as a trade association for the smart home industry, we work with our integrator members and our trade supplier members to be able to offer a solution for their customers and ensuring that they're getting the best options and a diverse range of products available within that particular platform. But for me personally, I actually am the person that goes out on the road and meets with the members, whether they be trade suppliers like Neil or integrators throughout the country, and even to a little bit within Europe as well.
Excellent. And we're going to get into CEDIA on one of these podcasts. We'll deep dive into who CEDIA are and so on for those of you out there who don't know. But today we're going to talk about speakers. We're still talking about building a media room, a cinema room, or your living room. What is the best type of speaker to use? And I kind of preempted this with the question, can you use hi-fi speakers? Well, Neil, a speaker doesn't know whether it's being fed a hi-fi stereo signal or an AV signal. So really, technically, any speaker should be able to work in both environments, or not.
So it's one of those amazing questions. Yes, the very best speakers can work in both environments, but like all products, there are compromises that you have got to make as a product designer as you decide, what price point is, physical constraints, and so on. Now, if you actually look at movies and music, there's a couple of really key differences between those, and that's the loudness and the spectral content of those things. So loudness, how loud is it? How dynamic are we going to go? And spectral content really refers much more to the bass, mid-range, and treble that are in those. Typically, you'll find movies with very low rumble. It's just a completely different thing than music. Yes, your very best speakers will achieve all of those remarkable things to an incredibly high level. But for most of us, we have to accept, some compromises to get the best performance for the usage that we're looking to have.
Yeah. And Steve, I know it's a cliche, but again, the first thing that we need to be thinking about when it comes to speakers is the room.
That is very true. You've got to ensure that you have the correct parameters, but also there's also compromise, because at the end of the day, not every room is perfect and not everybody's got a massive budget. So it's having the knowledge to be able to design the room within the challenges or the compromise that you may need to pull through from a particular client or particular space. So might be the challenges on any, whether it be a multi-channel setup. You just got to better understand what are the requirements from the client, and then also take on board what the room is doing at the same time, just to ensure that you can achieve the best performance within that space.
And of course, there's some brands out there, Martin, who specialize in one or the other as well, because there are differences, as Neil's already pointed out, in terms of the content that people may be watching within the room. A lot more rooms now are classed as media rooms, so it's a mix of audio, visual, and two-channel and so on. So in terms of manufacturers, and I know when you're not reviewing and got your reviewing hat on, you deal in speakers for a manufacturer. How does the manufacturer go about putting their systems together, putting their speaker package together, and how do they then educate the public as to what they possibly need?
Well, I guess one of the key things, certainly, that we think about at the company that I work for, is to get that front soundstage identical where possible, not just to shove in an extra center speaker to an existing stereo pair if possible. So it would make sense, if you watch more movies than music, for example, to have 3 identically matched speakers across the front soundstage. And not only does the fact that they're all timbrally matched mean that you get much smoother transition across the front soundstage, but also a lot of loudspeaker manufacturers, when they're designing speakers that are probably primed for home cinema, have distribution and radiation characteristics that wouldn't be the same necessarily for a music speaker. For example, they might attempt to limit first reflections, floor and ceiling in those designs, and also for maximizing power output may have more than one tweeter, a line array, this kind of thing. So yes, there are different considerations for different types of speaker, most definitely.
Okay, so I'm a client. I'm coming to you, Neil. I want a mixture. I want a media room. And I think this is where the vast majority of perhaps AV Forums members are, perhaps people who are listening in. They don't have the dedicated room. They don't have the massive budget for a DCI cinema, even though that's the coolest thing you could have ever. So for us who are, we know what our limitations are in terms of space and so on, how are you dealing with a client like that, and what kind of considerations are you taking on board?
Well, I think that you've got to take care to understand the client's own personal goals for that system. I have to tell you, sadly, Phil, in my own home, I do not have yet a DCI cinema. So like many others, I also have to temper my expectations as to what can be achieved.
Yeah.
But I also think that that's something that you have to decide. So, for example, I think that it's very important to understand a lot of people will be driven by the aesthetic impact of the product that they choose. In this world, it would be wonderful if we all couldn't care less. We took big black boxes and that was it. The aesthetics of the situation is very, very important, both because of what you see, but also the physical constraints of that. Now, I would suspect that a lot of your average consumers or even enthusiasts, that actually is the first thing that you'll use to chop down your list of potential options. Does it physically fit or not? Once you've made your list like that, I would suspect also for a media room, you're going to be talking about TV, movie, maybe some games, probably not so much music, background music, perhaps, as opposed to critical listening. You start to come up with a list of the things that are important. Now, one of the things I have noticed, and the guys can comment to this as well, is that there is a bit more willingness to have speakers on display. I was on a certain large Swedish retailer at the weekend, and they actually had a display in there with a turntable and speakers and stuff like that in one of the room setups, which was very, very interesting to see. So obviously, they don't do things by accident. That is something that people are looking at now. And of course, that presents a little bit more opportunity in the products that you might want to choose. I don't want to jump too far ahead of some of the other questions that I'm sure that you're going to ask, but really, I think that that's your first one. What are your physical constraints and your aesthetic goals?
Yeah. And hopefully, if you've been following advice over the podcast and the podcasts are out there, so go and have a listen if you haven't already, is that we've built up to this stage. So we've already thought about the room. We've thought about, treatments, possible treatments that we'd want. Aesthetics are really important, as Neil says. And now we're trying to choose the speakers that we want. So if we've got speakers on show, there are some brands out there, and certainly from a hi-fi slant, Martin, where the design of the speaker, the materials used, the build quality, is almost as important as the sound quality at the end of the day. I'm thinking of like manufacturers in the higher end, like Bowers and Wilkins and so on, with their 800 series and so on. So from that point of view, it works quite well for hi-fi, but when it comes to home AV and home cinema, where you want at least a minimum of 5 speakers and a subwoofer at least, it makes it a little bit more difficult, doesn't it?
Yeah, and in many cases, you might be veering towards black cabinets as well, particularly if it's a room, even if it's an AV room or a snug, something that's sort of less formal than a home cinema itself. You'd probably still want darker cabinets, and wherever you can, you want to minimize reflections. So black would be an obvious choice, and matte black going to that extent as well. But also, you will see that the manufacturers who do specialize more in home cinema type products rather than audio only, or audio biased, tend to not put as many resources into the way the loudspeakers look. So that's a sort of general differentiator, but you'll see that through a lot of manufacturers' lines.
And of course, we're going to come to ways that we can hide those. I know Neil's got some solutions there that we're going to get into in a little bit. But yeah, speakers, they tend to come in black, a bit like Henry Ford. You can have it in any color as long as it's black. And of course, that causes issues then, because you have other people that maybe use the space that maybe want a little bit lighter, a little bit nicer aesthetics about the room and so on in terms of furniture. Steve, we're in 2024 now, so in terms of solutions for that kind of thing, what can we do to minimize the impact of the ugliness of this kit? Because believe me, 20 years of doing this, some of the best sound systems I've had in my own home cinema have been pig ugly to look at. But it's been a black room where you can switch the lights off and you don't care because it sounds amazing. But and I've done pro audio stuff in there like Marquees and so on and Genelecs and that kind of thing. Pretty high end stuff, but it looks bloody awful. So how do we get around that?
Well, what I've started to notice as a trend is some of the mid-level to higher end speaker manufacturers, what they'll do is whether or not if they've got a hi-fi legacy, they'll then make sure that, let's say they've got a floor standing speaker within their lineup, but then they'll match up some in-walls or maybe on-wall options with maybe the same speaker drivers. So the client can then utilize floor standing speakers as a left and right stereo, and then a center channel that may be on wall or in wall, and then their surrounds, because they're all the same speaker design essentially, the same drivers, they can then retain that timbre throughout, depending on how many channels they actually want within that space. So it's not limited to, as I say, a cheaper brand or even a hi-fi brand. Even some of the dedicated CI brands are now starting to notice this because, as we've highlighted before, that more and more people are using spaces as multi-purpose, not having dedicated rooms, and ensuring they still want to have a high level of performance. So to overcome that aesthetic, I'm seeing that, but also at the same time, a lot of the what I would class as the black box manufacturers have now started to get into offering color options, maybe RAW colors. So a consumer can specifically say, I want this speaker to be the same color as my favorite color car. Or I don't know, I was with a manufacturer and they told me that they were producing a certain pair of speakers because their partner had the particular nail varnish that they particularly like. So they wanted to ensure that it was the same color as a specific nail varnish color. So yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, depending on how big your wallet is, you can go that way, or you can just deal with a company that has a diverse range of colors rather than it just being black. Maybe they've got white, or maybe they've got other wood finishes available within their lineup, but also retaining the same timbre throughout their range.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that because I have noticed some manufacturers going down the lines of having a configurator now. So, like when you go and spec your car and you go on the online configurator, you can choose the colors and the options and everything else. I have noticed that there's some speaker manufacturers starting to go down that route, and they'll offer you a configurator, a paint to sample option that you can have the finish that you want within your limit. You're paying a bit more, but that's then offered. So Neil, let's talk about what seems to me is an obvious solution for a media room, and that's in-wall speakers. Now, it seems like an obvious solution, but there are drawbacks to any type of speaker that you put in. It's the compromises that Steve mentioned earlier on when it comes to room design and so on. So when it comes to that, what are the tricks that you can use? How do you make sure that you're still getting as good a sound, if not better, than a dedicated boxed speaker?
So here, there's a deeply philosophical approach to all of these things if you want to dive into that. Now, I think it's important that as a group here, we just quickly discuss, you do get different types of speakers, floor standing, in wall, on wall, all of these different types, okay? Now, it's not just a case of where the speaker parks. They all actually have pluses and minuses from a technical point of view. If you have an unlimited huge space, there are definitive advantages about having a speaker away from the boundaries. I suspect that none of us have that amazing luxury of having such a large room to function with. So in these cases, and actually I have a tape measure here. There's a little thing that you get called a back wave reflection. This is a tape measure that literally measures the back wave reflection frequency. Thanks to our friends at Genelec. A cool little toy that you have there. That's typically a problem that you get with a floor standing speaker that's too close to a boundary. The reflected sound at a certain frequency causes a cancellation dip, okay? If you take that same speaker and you move that up onto the wall, typically that will be shallow because it's not taking up a lot of space. what that does is that moves the cancellation dip quite far up in the frequency range, but it doesn't get rid of it completely. If you put the speaker completely into the wall, you can get rid of that cancellation dip. That's the big advantage of a true baffle-mounted in-wall speaker. The other advantage that you actually get is as you move a speaker towards a boundary, a wall, then into a corner, then into the bottom corner, you actually gain efficiency. It's typically 6 decibels of gain that you get for each boundary that you add in. It's why a lot of people put a subwoofer right in the corner of a room. It makes it a lot louder for actually no cost. Now, if you then look at an in-wall speaker for a lot of installations, that actually is a very good technical choice in a lot of situations, not the compromise option that a lot of people perhaps think of an in-wall speaker. Like all things, of course, there are compromises that are made with in-wall speakers. And typically, if someone is looking online, you'll see an open back or infinite baffle style speaker, or you will see a closed back speaker. Now, an infinite baffle style, and here I have no particular gripe technology-wise one way or the other, they're both perfectly valid design choices. The big disadvantage of the open back speaker is sound goes both ways from the speaker. And that's very, very often a problem that you find with an open back design, particularly people who put in ceiling speakers with an open back design and forget to put the legally required fire hoods over those particular products, is that you get leakage back into the space. That's probably the number one thing that people forget when they are doing in-wall solutions. It's not that it magically doesn't make any sound. A wall is not a magic thing that blocks off all of the sound. Whereas, yeah, typically more expensive, but not always, closed back speaker for an in-wall installation has much less issue with that type of thing because of the way that it's been designed. So it's not really a technical compromise in a lot of cases now. It's much more about understanding the installation trade-off you're making to get the space back, basically.
And of course, when it comes to the aesthetics, Neil, you also have that advantage there with an in-wall. You then don't have boxes sitting on your floor. You get your floor space, but a bit like hanging a TV on the wall, you get your floor space back.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, that's your options there. And I guess, it comes back down to how you want to have your room set up and what you're actually going for and so on. So let's look at some examples. So Neil, I'm going to throw you an example here. We're going to do a quick teaser here. So we mentioned back at the beginning of this project that we're starting here on the podcast, take you through room design, and we said that Martin had his issues with a rented space and the solutions that Martin's come up with. We are now about to start building my room in my new house. It's a new build. We're turning an integrated garage into what is an absolutely multi-use room. It's not a home cinema. It's nothing like that. It's going to be a studio. It's going to be a testing area. It's going to be used for testing speakers and TVs and all that kind of thing. So it's immediately thrown up a lot of issues around how we get around that multi-use and what we're going to do with the space. So Neil, what are the solutions? Because you've already done the mood boards, you've looked at the drawings, you know what the room's like. So when a client comes like that and you look at the space, and obviously space with constraints like that, what's the thought process in terms of being able to produce something that's going to give a certain level of experience, but also hit what the client wants?
So I'm going to say something obvious to start with, right? So Phil, you have benefited from a design service there with what you've described, right? It's almost impossible to imagine how beneficial it is to have proper designs for something. So I think that Phil's case is really, really appropriate, because what we were able to do was not only some mood boards and stuff, but some general arrangements and ideas on how the actual space would be used. And Phil, I think that was, it was useful for everybody, because you could give your feedback, this or not, or maybe we could do this, or I hadn't thought of that. Now, the reason that that's so important is once you actually have a much better understanding of what can be achieved and how a space can be used, it actually often changes the thought process of how that can go around. Now, it's a lot easier to do that on a piece of paper with Visio or AutoCAD than it is to do that when you've got, 2-3 tradesmen standing in your living room.
Yeah.
Having done my own extensive remodel in my house last year and family and all the rest of the stuff, I know how difficult that is when you have those tradesmen standing there waiting for you to tell them exactly what they've got to do. So that whole design thing, it's impossible to overstate how beneficial that is, and even if you're an enthusiast and you're doing that with your own SketchUp or anything like that, so valuable to do because it will help you to understand the usage of the space. And it's only once you've got an understanding of how the space can be used that you can really map out what products might be ideal. Now, here, guys, before I stop, I will confess my own naivety in this whole thing. I do not typically listen to a lot of music when I am in the house. I spend all day out here in my office and I have all the tunes I want out here. And of course, I didn't think in that planning process about putting in a distributed audio system. Very obvious. I could have had my choice of products in the warehouse that would have done the job. But I just didn't use it, so I didn't think about it. But we use the house differently now that the extension's been built and all of those types of things. And I have a very nice sunroom, and I often sit there with the sun on me, and I think to myself, I wish I had some tunes going here. Better than the sound bar that works perfectly well with the TV, but it isn't actually spatially the right place for that. So even people like myself, with all their claims of good design, can make mistakes on these things. So putting in some cables is also a very good idea to let you remedy the mistakes that you perhaps make when
What's
you're
the
doing
most expensive cable, Neil?
Yes, it's the one that you don't have, Steve. Yes, it undoubtedly is, because I'll have to take down my whole roof to put the cable in.
Yeah.
So, that's again, I wanted everyone to know, it doesn't matter how long you've been doing this, it's actually quite a difficult process to get it nailed on.
Yeah, I mean, I thought I knew what I was doing with the space. I thought, yeah, I know what I want. I want this, this, and this. But then actually, when you, and this is the important, this is the point I want to try and get across, is do your research and look at other ideas and look at other solutions and look at what other people are doing and get somebody else's opinion on the space and the use of the space, whether that's your partner, whether that's your mates, whether that's a professional like Neil, get somebody else to look at it, because Neil sent Tom up. Tom's job title is a design architect, Neil, is that right?
So Tom works for our cinema interiors division, and Tom runs the cinema interiors division.
Yeah. So Tom came up, he took some measurements, he had a look around, and so on. But what he then came back with was something that he listened to what I wanted and what I said. Well, this wall could be used for that and that, and we're going to do this and so on, and we'll put the speakers there. And when he actually came back with his thoughts on it, completely different. But then that started the creative process with me and my partner, because we're suddenly thinking, well, actually, if we spin that round and we use this wall for that, and we put, the TVs that are being compared on the other wall, and then we've got a nice wall that looks dressed, and you can have a TV and film it on that one. You can do the testing and comparison on the other one, and it just opened up ideas. And of course, when you come into your space, this is what you should be doing. And when it comes to speakers, this is where you then start thinking about solutions, because the reference system I have in storage at the minute, even though it's a great system, fantastic system, I'm going to have no room if I fit that into that space, because it's not designed for it. And it was in a far bigger space and a far bigger room. And this is where the thought process now has to change. And obviously in my case, and you guys are all going to follow the journey with this, hopefully, while we put the room together and the multi-use and so on. This is where you rethink things, Steve. And an organization like yours, your goal is to train the integrators, is to give them the best practice, is to, tell the industry or push the industry in certain ways in terms of how they go about design and adding, what the client wants, but also what's going to work for them. And how important, from CDS point of view, even when it comes to placing a speaker, how important is that whole design and actually sitting down and thinking about the process before you even order what kind of speakers it is that you're going to fit in the space?
It's so important because, as we were alluding to earlier on, without that information, you can't really start a journey. It's it all impacts on how the room is designed. It's all impacts on the level of performance that the client expects. You can set expectation, manage, I should say, manage expectations of the client. If you've had that discussion, have a better understanding of what everybody, all the key stakeholders can do and will need to do within that project. And but everybody, if they're an enthusiast, everybody's got a preferred brand that they want to work with. But if as a for instance, because of the way the room is set up or is going to be utilized in a specific way, you might not be able to use your preferred brand in that given situation. And also there's this other element. I've come from a background of, I'm lucky enough that I can get away with what I need to do with my partner. However, sometimes there are challenging conversations to be had when somebody else's opinion says, right, well, actually, we need this flexibility within the system. And then there's also children or other members of the family that might say, well, actually, I want to be able to do this with the system as well. So unless there is a frank and open discussion of what the objectives are for the client within a given space, then I think after that, that's when guidelines can then be implemented in terms of how the room should be set up, where the speaker location should be, what the power output of the speaker or amplification within that speaker should be. But without the initial guidelines, objectives, you can't then apply the guidelines to be able to give that client what they need within that space.
And I know we're using terminology like client and so on because yourself and Neil are in the business. This is what you do today. But people who are listening here, they can do a lot of this themselves. They don't need to bring in design teams or anything like that. It's if they're working to a budget and they can't afford to bring somebody else in, there are things that they can do, Martin. So what kind of advice would you give? I mean, I think the obvious one's a bit of A4 and some crayons, isn't it? And kind of just draw out what you think.
Absolutely. Although beware, because your visualization will never be what you end up with in practice. It will be close to. I mean, you can measure to your heart's content, and the more you do of it, actually, the better result you will end up with. But I do think it's good to have an idea of what your intended viewing angle to your display is. For example, how and where your chief loudspeakers are going to be, whether they're going to be towed in towards the listening area, all that kind of good stuff. But yes, there are resources online you can use. And of course, you can use Dolby. I mean, THX used to publish loads of great documentation on this stuff. And of course, CEDIA does as well. But there are basic rules that you can use. And yes, I would say loads of resources online.
So I'm going to throw one to you, Martin. Obviously, you've come up with your design. And when you explained it to us on here, all of us, I think, it kind of went, wow, I hadn't thought of that. I hadn't really considered that was a way around it. So maybe just to remind people what you actually did in your space, because it's rented, so you don't want to be drilling holes and running cables up walls and that kind of thing.
Correct. And I didn't really know what my solution was. I was talking to a carpenter who just lives locally here in Henley, and I told him what my dilemma was. I said, I can't fix loudspeakers to walls or ceilings. I have what you would term on-wall speakers. So I said my plan was to buy some kind of off-the-shelf truss system from one of the AV or pro AV gear stockists, but I couldn't find anything that really suited. And this carpenter, who's a very creative guy, said, I understand exactly what you're trying to do. And he came round, took some measurements. I explained what I needed as a bottom line. And so it went from there. And he took a couple of days to build it, brought it in like a jigsaw puzzle and put it together right in front of me.
And that truss holds everything, doesn't it? It holds the
Holds
screen, it holds
everything.
the projector, it holds the
Yeah.
speakers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And all the measurements had to be absolutely precise, because with a 10 by 10 or 10 by 11 foot room, I've hardly got any throw distance for my Epson projector. But combined with that very short throw and a seating area that's relatively close to the screen for an approximate 50-degree viewing angle, it's as cinematic and immersive as you could possibly wish for. And that's sonically and visually.
Yeah. So Neil, your imagination is what you need here, really, and this is what you guys get paid the big bucks for, because it's not just the kit that you guys supply, it's the expertise, it's the design, it's the how are we going to solve the problem. That you are the problem solvers.
You know, it's funny. I had that exact discussion with someone only this morning. I think that there's an awful lot of thought about kit in what we do, because kit's cool, isn't it? You know, we all like a bit of gear. Who doesn't? But actually, more and more, because there's truly no really bad stuff anymore. You know, I think that is fair to say. Computer design and all that changed the game completely. A lot more of it is about what you are looking to achieve. So, if I come back to my badly thought out sunroom for a minute, I would like to have my cake and I would like to eat it very much in there. I would like to have my immersive audio system because, you know, I like it. I would like to have a very nice music system. But I would also like to have a thing that's called soundscapes. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that sort of a term. That's something that's becoming much more common as well. It's like ambient music, sounds, stuff just happening around you. It's quite common as a form of sound masking or a wellness sort of a situation. Now, such was my desire to have my cake and eat it. I went out to find a possible way of achieving that. And in fact, there are new products available that actually allow you to spatialize the audio within a space. Now, what I would do in my cube-shaped sunroom is that I would put speakers in each of the four corners above, below, and around the middle. Now, that would create a sound field that I could then position through the wonders of very clever mathematics and these processing boxes, any sound that I want to have. And if I want to have the TV on that wall and then stereo coming from another way, if that happens to be how I'm sitting, that's just the preset. Now, in the old days, something like that, you could do it if you had some like cool DSP and switch some relays and stuff like that. You know, we've all seen the classic room spin. But now that sort of stuff, I mean, I'm sure what I described sounded utterly fantastical there. Yeah, it all runs on a Mac Mini. I don't mind telling you. It's not like a horrendously complicated thing like it was in the past. Often the challenge is actually knowing that such a solution exists, to be able to think of how you would apply that to your own space. Because for me, that would allow me to keep very discrete speakers and not change the feel of the room, because that's what's important to me personally in that particular space.
Yeah. And Steve, sorry, Neil, go on.
No. So that's also something that's very important. Just is difficult to understand what can be achieved, I think.
Yeah. So Steve, how do you get this kind of solution that Neil's talking about out there? How do you get it discussed? How do the end users get to know it, other than those wealthy enough to be buying these services in? How does the general consumer out there get to know about this and how they can utilize it in their living spaces when they want to create sound?
Well, I would say for most of the integrators that we deal with, I would say from a mid-level and higher, depending on what their database of customers are like, I think it's a pretty straightforward conversation for them in the sense that they would outreach to to architects and specifiers and giving them an overview of what's available within those given situations. So to broaden and educate them about audio, video, wellness features, or other scapes, maybe outdoor audio, multi-channel audio, multi-room audio. So, and there's 2 or 3 ways that can happen. One, by utilizing things like a CPD, so where the specifier gets benefit of earning specific points because they are listening to an integrator talking about what's available within our industry, or just generally talking to their clients and working with distributors and manufacturers that may already have these spaces available in demonstration. I think there's a company that's just launched a new showroom, as a for instance, in central London, which highlights all of that with Atmos spaces, with utilizing something like an Apple TV, which has immersive audio soundtracks, but also at the same time having floor standing speakers as the front 2 channels, and then having a bed layer of all the same speakers, but in wall. So if they are going to, if the consumer is allowed to go along with an integrator being shown these spaces, it just widens and the awareness of these products that are available to consumers.
And Martin, having this conversation today, we started out with a very specific goal here, which was we were going to talk about floor standers, stand mounts, subsat systems, in-wall speakers, center speakers, that kind of thing. And once again, and I think this kind of points to where our industry and our hobby is going, is it's no longer one room with a set layout of speakers and one set use, is it?
Yeah, no, I would absolutely agree with that. I mean, there is a speaker now for all occasions, and that's really illustrated by the popularity now of the 2-channel powered set of loudspeakers which now come almost by default with HDMI or HDMI ARC. So there has been this kind of hybrid now in so many cases where we have a music and TV system in one. And we've seen some wonderful, in my opinion, speakers come out in that category as well. So no, I would say it's a very fluid AV and straight audio is a very fluid and evolving landscape, I would say, particularly at the moment. And like I said, there's a speaker for all occasions now.
Yeah. So Neil, again, we're coming back to this cliche of the room. But it's not just the room, it's how that person wants to use the room and the end goal at the end of the day. And now, again, it used to be the cinema. You know, we wanted the cinema experience at home. So you had 3 speakers across the front, a couple of subwoofers, maybe 4 if you could manage one in each corner, your surround speakers, your above Atmos speakers in a black room with a big screen and a projector. But as we've just been discussing, that seems to be the minority these days. And those that are putting those systems in those dedicated rooms, I've seen some of the work you've done, I've seen some of the work some of the CDA members have done, absolutely stellar. Out of this world systems that you can get now with your lighting effects that you do, Neil, the light panels that you have and that kind of thing, in time with what's happening on the screen and the whole rooms. It's fantastic what you can do. But the general consumer, the person out there, the enthusiast level, there's so much that you can do with your space now. You're not constrained to just having your horizontal plane and your immersive speakers, are you?
Well, I think for me, Phil, that's one of the things that I'm most interested in about joining in with these podcasts. You know, it's great to have a nice chat with like-minded people. But I think that it is difficult for you asked Steve the question, how do we get the product out there? I was on bated breath, Steve, waiting for you to tell me what I need to do to get the news out there. It is difficult. It is difficult. Martin knows this also. How do you let the general user base know what can be achieved? Because a lot of this stuff, yes, if you go crazy, it can cost, how far do you want to go with these types of things? But a lot of this doesn't need to cost crazy money. Good performance is available at very reasonable prices. aesthetically styled products are available at very reasonable prices. It's about putting the whole package together. You know, and I'm sure we've all joked about it, you know, the old black box cinemas and all that type of stuff. Of course, there's still a place for that in the market. And, you know, by the nature of the beast, a lot of guys on AV forums, that is going to be what they dream of having. I understand that. But there's such a big world now of amazingly cool solutions beyond that black box room. And that actually, for me, what has driven this multi-use, multi-purpose room more? Is it all cost of living and all that type of stuff, depressing stuff, which forces people to do it? Or is it simply the fact that this tech can be integrated in just so much more spaces? I like to think it's the second option. Because there are so many choices, we've been speaking about speakers today, infinite numbers of speakers. You don't even need to see the speakers these days to have amazing sound. We can do invisible sound. Same with displays, you know. Used to be that you had to have a massive TV, and now it's a little flat panel on the wall or a pop-up projector screen or whatever else it is. And I think that is really a huge part of what's driven the change we've all seen in what the actual mass market is now. And I think that for me, that's very, very exciting. What's the point doing all of this stuff in your house? It's to have a experience, you know. You're not going to call your neighbour in to let them see the new bit of gear that you bought. Maybe you are, but I can assure you you're in the minority if you do such a thing. But yeah, you get your friends over on the weekend or whatever else. You've got a cool room, some nice tunes. It's very nice indeed. Some lights going indeed. And I think that's what people want these days, much more than anything else.
What makes me really sad, though, Neil, is the idea that people do have these incredible integrated systems and smart home systems and that they end up not using them. And I talk to a lot of integrators who tell me, you know, they go through this whole thing of explaining the control panels to them and everything, and they end up never getting used. It's just really sad.
Yeah. I mean, I remember, I'm not going to name names here, but I'm pretty sure it was one of your jobs, Neil, back in the day that I went along to have a look at. And yeah, I think it was one of your companies that you distributed to who put the system in, and it was in a cow barn. So I went and had a look at that. I was going to make a video about it and so on, and the owner walked in, and you know, he really unassuming bloke, and I shook his hand and stuff, and I said, "Oh, you must really love your music, your movies to, you know, put there. It was £250,000. You must really love it." No, just takes a box. The kids use it for the video games, but the thing was, it was an amazing system. His passion was cars. We got talking about cars, and before I knew it, I was getting shown the Aston Martins and the Ferraris and so on. But you know, this for some people, these are just box ticking, or they're nice to have. They add into the real estate and so on. And then you have the enthusiast side, who that's the aspiration to get to. But I think, you know, the market's changed in 20 years, and this is what we've been finding on this podcast as we've been having these discussions, is that there's so many solutions now, and there is a market for the Uber end, and there always will be that Uber end, and DCI cinemas and that kind of thing. IMAX, you can get an IMAX at home if you've got the budget for it. These are all fantastic things, but it's not what the main consumer out there, even if they're an enthusiast, is going to go for. So there are loads of speakers out there. The main thing, and this is the thing we keep coming back to, and I know the guys will back me up on this, is think through your design, think through what it is you want to achieve from the room, because you might start out with one idea, like I did when I said to Neil, "Listen, I've got this room, I'm going to be doing this because I need to do it because of testing TVs and all sorts and projectors and everything else and speakers." And I had an idea in my head, and that idea has been flipped so many times, and you could be exactly the same. Martin had an idea, he spoke to the right person who said, "Well, actually, I've got a solution for you." And that's the key here. I think the key is decide what it is that you would like, and then discuss the idea on the forums, get other forum members to give their opinions on what their experiences are, get other people to give you suggestions, even if it's your partner. They might have a different angle on what it is that you're trying to achieve. and get that right before you start talking about kit. And I want to come back to this point because
and price as well, Phil. Know how much you're prepared to spend, because the last thing you want to be doing is catching up with your bank balance. Know what you've got aside.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's something that Neil said earlier on. Don't fantasize about the gear. Don't be driven by the gear. We all like to read the reviews about this and that, and you think, oh, that's a cool product, and wouldn't that look great? But it might be the wrong thing for you. It might be the wrong solution for you in your space. So think that through as well. So that's the discussion for this month. If you've got any questions, then obviously get them into us. Old-fashioned email is avforums. Sorry, it's podcast@avforums.com. So old-fashioned, I forget the address. You can also leave your comments on YouTube in the comments below. You leave your questions there. Or, of course, avforums.com. Go and have a look at the forum list. Right down the bottom, you'll find a podcast forum. Click on the episode that you're interested in, or this one, and leave your question there. And we're going to end on some Q&As. From the last Home AV podcast, which was the 17th of June, Atmos and Surround Speakers, do you need them? Again, another conversation that went off in a number of different directions, because there is no right and wrong when it comes to that. So looking at the homepage thread, Sound and Vision said 5.1 AV receiver setup is enough for me in my small British living room. Plus, the price of electricity bills nowadays being way too much makes it harder to have more speakers and so on. And yet, it's just what Martin said, budget. You've got to work within your budget. It's no good blowing that budget and then getting yourself into all sorts of problems.
But also 5.1 as the base, Phil, if I can just come in on that. If you've got a really fine, dynamic, beautiful sounding system, I mean, Atmos at that point is really just the cherry on top. I mean, 5.1, the core, the base is really spectacular when it's
no, absolutely. I agree with you 100%. I think we discussed this on a previous podcast where we were talking about some of the best sound mixes I can think of off the top of my head. Stuff like Dunkirk, it's a 5.1 mix. It always has been. But you listen to that on a good system, you could swear that the planes are overhead, that the bullets are whizzing over your head. You don't need the Atmos speaker. So 5.1 works for you. Absolutely. THX 1138 UK says with upfiring KEF R50 speakers on top of the front R300s in the living room, matched with a centre speaker and dipole speakers on the rear wall. Side walls are far too far apart. He said he probably wouldn't bother about upfirers if he did it again. Bouncing the sound off the ceiling gives some ambience, but it's not the same as having an actual ceiling mounted speaker. 5.1 is just fine for most living rooms. So again, coming back to 5.1, if you can do it well, there is no need to go 712 or 714 or whatever, if it works for you and works for your space. Jimmy Grease says some of the best movies ever made don't have anything but 5.1 or even 2.0. I couldn't imagine watching Glengarry and hearing Ed Harris sliding some papers just above to distract me. Yeah, absolutely. And again, this is something else that I think is enthusiasts, people new to the hobby and that kind of thing. We did it back in the ProLogic days. We thought, well, we've got rear speakers. There must be things that come out of the rear speakers. If it's something that draws you out of the experience, if it's suddenly an effect behind you that's drawn you out, it's ruined the effect of the the illusion of film and losing yourself. So it's not about that. And I hear this as well, and I don't know about you, Neil, with your clients or Steve or Martin. The number of people saying, well, I've got an Atmos, but I don't get much sound from above me.
I get that all the time, even in my cinema when I'm doing my movie nights. But the whole point of movie sound design is to draw you into the action. Yeah. Everything should be pushing you towards the screen.
Yeah. So even 36 channel systems, Neil, if the creator hasn't put anything or any objects above you, you're not going to get any sound up there.
Well, it's the challenge of my life to fill these speakers with some stuff. Mr. Client has kindly purchased them from me. They better make a noise at all times.
Yeah.
Well, but look, all joking aside, that is a real thing that I struggle with, because if you've made the ballsy move of selling someone on indeed a 36-40 channel audio system, I know that I would be quite pissed off if that was set mute for a lot of the time. So that is actually a really, really important part of the whole discussion these days, is how Steve RP22 is very, very strict on the angular placement of surround channels. and you will not always get that in a native mix. And so there's a very, very big challenge about the spatialization of the sounds if you provide an expansive sound field.
Yeah, I would also look to on the RP22. Yes, I think it's less strict than when you look if you compare it to say Dolby or THX guidelines in terms of speaker positioning. But for me, in terms of surround sound or Dolby Atmos, etc., I think it's content's king, right? Let's be clear. I mean, if you think about all the movies that have been released recently, they've all got some form of Dolby Atmos soundtrack now, or a version of, whether it be a streaming version or a disc version. I mean, we've probably already gone over this, but when there's a new announcement of a disc version of a movie, I'm in. I'll buy it. I'd rather buy the disc version or the streaming version. Then once again, that will then activate more of the speakers within my environment at home. And then watching a Star Wars TV series like Acolyte, I'm going to switch on the big system rather than have it in two channel. So I think it's all about content's king. If it's older stuff, hopefully you've got a mixer on your processor that might activate the speakers, and if you've managed to have those Dolby Atmos speakers up in the ceiling. But other than that, it's just let's see what the content is, and also bear in mind there's a lot more Dolby Atmos music out there.
Yeah.
So I've just reinvigorated my audio collection by having Apple TV and just going through Apple Music and just using that all the time. Some of the DJ mixes out there are just brilliant. So
and of course Atmos is short for atmosphere. And that's what it's there to create. It's to create an ambience, it's to create an atmosphere, it's to create the illusion of being in a space. So you're not going to get bangs and whistles and pops and explosions all the time. It could be the wind blowing. It could be a really quiet scene in a movie, and all you can hear is the wind blowing, but it gives you that effect that the wind is passing through you. You're in that space, and that's the whole crux of it. It's a creative tool, and I think people talk too much about the gear and actually don't watch the content. I think that's sometimes, especially on AV forums, we're all guilty of it. We talk about the kit. Actually, we need to switch off and just focus on what it is that we're watching sometimes, I think.
A disc has just come out, which if you do need to show your client that you have very active ceiling or height channel speakers, it's only been released in US, but it is the Dolby Atmos version of Gravity Blu-ray. It's not 4K, but they've just re-released it again with the Dolby Atmos soundtrack.
I've got the original pressing of that.
Have you? Yeah,
and it is
the most aggressive Dolby Atmos recording I've ever heard.
Yeah.
It's amazing, actually. Yeah.
If you want to test timbre matching on your speaker system,
yeah, that's it.
Because you've got George Clooney going from the front and all the way around and over the top, and if his voice isn't the same all the way across, you got problems.
But
during the Soyuz entry, and literally there are metal crashes coming above your head and coming down through the front soundstage. It's just amazing. Yeah.
And it's only like $20.
Yeah.
Whereas the original version was £30.
Yeah.
So I think the only thing that we haven't mentioned here, and we're going to mention it very briefly because Neil fits a lot of these video wall type screens. We're seeing more 98-inch, 115-inch TVs and so on. They create their own issue, Neil, don't they, when it comes to front soundstage, especially center channel soundstage? Because let's face it, even with a 115-inch TV, and I've tested one in quite some detail in Poland, the sound was rubbish. You would not use that as a center channel in any genuinely good audio system. So what's the challenges and what's some of the solutions there, Neil?
Well, I mean, the obvious challenge is that you can't put the speaker in the middle of where the sound is coming from. Decline that. Now, the sheer scale of these displays in a lot of situations, what would be our typical solution is you put a sound bar underneath the display, right? That would be a typical way that you do it. I've said sound bar, 3 speakers underneath the display.
Yeah.
Now, the problem often is that actually pushes things so far down. If you've got a coffee table or, you're not a cricket, that you've got your ease and your knees, then it can be too low down, actually. And actually what you'll find a lot of these big TVs are actually better to put the sound above and angle it down into the listening area, as opposed to try and fire it up into the listening area. Now, of course, moving the speaker up, that brings this whole ceiling bounce discussion into play, which is a challenge that you've got to solve. Now, we've spent quite a lot of time looking at ways of solving that very real problem, I don't mind telling you. Trinov actually did a very interesting white paper on different approaches towards that as well. What you'll tend to find is that the single speaker will give you the typically best result because of comb filtering and stuff like that. But if you have very advanced processing, there are things that you can do where you actually have a speaker above and below, and you're blending those. And it's actually a very, very interesting area of development at this minute in time. If you could relate that actually to commercial cinema just for a second, there's this whole push for big LED walls in commercial cinema because, you know, people want an experience that's better than home. So, you know, 300 nits HDR in a commercial cinema, you ain't doing that with a projector anytime soon. Well, that sort of initial approach was to use speakers mounted on the side walls, really like a bounce up speaker that fired off the screen and back into the listening position. But actually, it's quite a disappointing effect, to be honest with you. You lose an awful lot of the result because of that. I'm sure you can imagine how far the sound has to travel to the screen and then back to the listener. You have to have a huge output, and of course, it's impossible to have 100%, you know, laser focused beam that comes off. It's a very difficult solution, and actually very, very similar to the whole discussion about bounce sounds off the ceiling in an Atmos system. So that is actually an area where there's an awful lot of development happening at this minute in time, is how do you get the best sound? Simple answer. Speaker along the top, angle down into the listening position is probably the best bet at this minute in time.
One of the interesting things I haven't seen yet is obviously Sony's solution on OLEDs is to actually use the screen as the speaker. So they have actuators on the back of their OLED screens. That's what creates the higher frequencies, a couple of bass drivers to fill that in. Very, very, very interesting solution because the sound is coming to you from the screen. So if we're talking about micro LED, that could be a possible solution there because you have the thinness, but then you have the issue that it's made up of panels. It's not one solid piece. So again, you think, well, that could be a solution, but actually, if you can only vibrate one 12-inch panel within a huge 30-foot screen, it's not really solving the problem, is it?
Probably one of the few people that's actually done that.
Right.
So we had that set up in the factory. Now, what we actually discovered when we were testing that, because of the modular nature, I don't know if you understand how those systems work. You have a massive transducer, think like a voice coil basically glued onto a moving surface. Now that surface can often have quite a bit of mass of its own right. People who are interested in cone design will understand that that in itself is a challenge. And it makes a sound by moving that mass. Now the downside of that is intermodulation distortion because it's a huge single panel that's trying to recreate all the frequencies and they all overlay on top of each other. If you're realistic and you accept, you know, I'm going to get a good result between maybe 150 and 14 kilohertz, right? Pretty okay for most people's hearing. I don't mind telling you. You can get quite a good result from that. But what we found was on the display itself, hopeless, there was no chance. We actually mounted it on plywood panels that went floor to ceiling behind the LED display. And it was uncanny how cohesive the wave was that came out towards you, even with this big metal thing in the way of it. Now, was it hi-fi? No. Did it sound like the sound was really coming and could be located in the different zones? Yes. It was very, very interesting to do that. Surely a huge amount of work that can be done to improve that. Now that's the advantage that Sony have got with the OLEDs, is that they know what it is, and they can do time domain measurements, and basically can do like a pre-EQ that compensates basically for those types of things. I'm sure there's loads of really cool stuff like that, all to come down the track. We'll be back at the NXT. Whoever it is that's got the ticket for that one will be shouting that they're it again. But you know, this technology is so interesting, and it just cries for these new challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll no doubt be talking about this in future podcasts as well. But I think we're running fast out of time on this one for this month. So just wrapping up on current competitions. If you're interested in winning anything, we have AVR X1800H from Denon. That's an AVR at 699 quid. Courtesy of Peter Tyson. It's a 7.2 receiver. You can win that thanks to Peter Tyson. That's Friday the 2nd of August is the cut-off date for that one. You can win a pair of Focal headphones worth £599 from av.com. That closes on the 11th of August. You can win a pair of Q Acoustics M40 powered micro tower speakers and a pair of QED digital cables worth a total of £1,069. That's a best-in-class winner from our review as well. So a cracking prize there. That closes on the 31st of July, so you need to be quick on that one, depending on when you listen to this podcast. And you can also win a streaming system worth £2,400, which includes a Ruscan Atessa integrated streaming amplifier, monitor audio at Silver 107G. That's a mouthful. Bookshelf speakers, and that closes on the 2nd of August. August the 28th. Is the closing date for that one. Some absolutely cracking prizes there. Head over to avforums.com/competitions to enter that, and that's open to anybody over 18 who is a resident in the UK and obviously an AV Forums member. And of course, you also got disc competitions that you can go and win DVDs. How retro is that? You can also win Blu-rays and 4K discs. That's open to our patrons and normal AV Forums members. And the disc competitions, again, eligible members only from the UK. Previous winners, Woodface7, he won a Project T2 Superphone with turntable. Another excellent prize from Peter Tyson and Henley Audio there. That was worth £559. Well done, Woodface7, for winning that one. Also got some new patrons, Roger Tinsley, Ossian Harper, Jim Cameron, and Mr. Black 79. Thank you very much for your support. Really is appreciated. All of our patrons, you do help us produce this editorial, put together the podcast and so on. And one day we might even make a good one. And of course, bought us a coffee. Repoman666 bought us another coffee. I don't know if that's the same one as the last podcast. If it is, we'll heat it up in the microwave. But thank you very much for buying us a coffee. It really is appreciated. Future podcasts. So that's it for us on this edition. Our next edition is the movies and TV show edition with Kaz and the movies team. That's Monday the 22nd of July, and that's followed by the 4K physical media Blu-ray disc show, which is proving to be incredibly popular. Thank you very much for everybody that listens in on that one. It just proves that physical media is not dead. It's far from it. And that's Thursday the 25th of July for that edition. All these are available from 7 p.m. on the AV Forums podcast YouTube channel, so go and subscribe to that. And like I say, if you do enjoy what we do here, if you value the information and so on, and you think it deserves a bigger audience, then please share it. Please put it out there on social channels, Facebook groups, all that kind of thing. It would be appreciated. So my thanks to Martin, Steve, and Neil. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Phil.
Thank you.
I'm Phil Hinton. Thank you very much for watching and listening, and we'll see you again soon. Goodbye.